Alright, and welcome to the introductory part 0 of my Latin tutorial or Latin language series. Now, before we get started, just the format of this series, it's going to be partially scripted and partially off the cuff. So be prepared for that. I do like some level of spontaneity in my presentations, but at the same time, I do like there to be some form as well. So that's what to go in expecting. Another thing is, in this video, I'm going to go over the materials that you're going to want to take this or to get the most out of my presentations. However, I'm going to do my best to not require these materials if you choose not to purchase them. And while I can't recommend it, there are less than savory ways of achieving or of attaining most of this content. Though, as always, I encourage you to purchase it, because these people who make these materials really deserve the credit for all the effort that they do and all the good that I feel they do with these materials. But let's go. We want to look. Here are the things you're going to need. It's the second slide. Also, I'll probably count out the slide numbers because that helps me later on in editing. So if that bothers you, you can tell me about that, but I will probably say what slide number it is. So this is the second slide. What you may need: Lingua Latina per se illustrata, Wheelock's Latin, and Alan Greenow's New Latin Grammar. And this is not necessarily in order, but Lingua Latina per se illustrata is number 1. You're going to want that the most, which is why we're going to talk about it first. Third slide. Lingua Latina per se illustrata is by far the best way to learn Latin, in my opinion, other than, being an ancient Roman or growing up in the Middle Ages at some kind of ecclesiastical school. This is the best way to learn it. And it's actually quite similar to the way that Latin was learned prior to the 1800s. But this method fell by the wayside for a long while for various reasons. And it's similar to how modern languages are taught. Latin is taught very differently than most modern languages, but Lingua Latina per se illustrata revives somewhat of the old tradition of Latin learning and of language learning. So what you're going to want with this, with Lingua Latina, is you're going to want part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is called Lingua Latina Familia Romana, and part 2 is called Lingua Latina Roma Aeterna. So that's what you're going to want. And you also, if you can get the College Companion book, if at all possible. It's not written by the same original author, Hans Orberg, who wrote all the other books in the series, but it's invaluable. It was written by a female professor who works at the University of Kentucky. I'm blanking on her name, unfortunately, which is a shame because she does good work. Currently, she only has the College Companion out for part 1 of Lingua Latina. I am eagerly awaiting the College Companion for part 2. So we'll be using that as much as possible, especially later on. In the beginning, it's not going to be as necessary, but later on, you might find it very, very invaluable. And as well, I encourage you, if you do order print copies of these books, to buy the full color editions. It's not necessary. You will not miss anything out. You will not miss out on anything if you do not get the full color editions. It does not increase necessarily your learning capacity to learn Latin. However, the illustrations in these books are absolutely wonderful. It's some of the best artwork I've seen in a long, long time. It's really quite stunning sometimes. The way that they incorporate the illustrations into the greater, work of, I guess it'd be pedagogy. I'm not sure, but how they incorporate the illustrations into teaching. It's just absolutely wonderful. I strongly recommend the full color copies. Unfortunately, I don't have the digital copies of the full color copies, so for these presentations, I'm going to be using the non-colored copies, which does me great sadness, but it is what it is. Now, and the other thing you're going to need, well, actually, let me talk about this first. You're also going to want, this is not required once again, but it brings a great deal of added value to your experience is there exist several readers for this for the Lingua Latina series. Two of them in particular I'm quite fond of. The first one is Colloquia Personarum, which carries you through chapters 1 through 15 of part 1 of Lingua Latina. And then there's Fabulae Surae, which carries you through the remaining chapters of part 1 of Lingua Latina. They're not required, but it's extra practice, and they're not exercises. The stories that they tell in these companion readers are quite fascinating, like quite interesting and quite fun. So I would highly recommend them. I enjoy both of them thoroughly. In addition, there are several other readers that go along. I'm not going to talk about those as much, A, because I don't have much experience with them, and B, because the little experience that I have with them, they have been satisfactory, but they didn't seem too necessary. And also, you're going to need patience and self-control. Learning Latin is not an easy language to learn, not in the slightest. Latin is a difficult language. Latin is a very, very difficult language. That does not mean it's always a frustrating language. It can be very fun for things to be difficult. In fact, Latin provides a great challenge, a great intellectual challenge if you're trying to stimulate your mind and think about things in new ways. Learning Latin is a fantastic way to do that, but it will be difficult sometimes. So you need to understand that with these things that you must be patient. And the good thing is that hopefully the amount of time that you should be spending on one of my lessons that I'm going to be putting out is about how long it should take me to create each lesson. So in the beginning, it'll be quite easy. However, later on, it'll be a lot harder. But when it's a lot harder, it'll also be harder for me to create these presentations. So it's going to be, I'm sorry if there's noise outside. I'm currently living in a noisy environment. That won't exist for too much longer, as my place of residence only about 2 months more, which is good. So yeah, just make sure you understand that patience is a virtue and self-control is also a virtue. So now we're going to move on to the next thing you might need, which is Wheelock's. Now, Wheelock's Latin is a fine text to use. It's a much more traditional text than Lingua Latina. Lingua Latina teaches you Latin through story. There's never any, well, there is some grammar explanation, but they always give you examples before they give you instruction, and you're supposed to not even need the instruction. Most of the learning that I did from Lingua Latina, I never even looked at the instruction sections. I tried to figure it out by myself from context, which is how you learn any language. That's the best way to learn a language, is to figure it out from context and just know how it works. There's no reason to memorize 1,000 rules if you don't know how to apply these rules meaningfully. But if you do like understanding the rules, Wheelock's is probably the best place to go to understand these rules. I don't think it's a good place to go to learn Latin as a language. However, it's a great place to go to learn Latin as a system. So that's what I'm recommending Wheelock's for. I'm not sure how much I'm going to be using it in my lessons and in my presentations, but I do really like Wheelock's for what it is. So I will make reference of it sometimes. However, if you like an analytical approach to a language and a very logical approach as opposed to a context-driven approach, you may want to purchase Wheelock's. Now, as it says in the slide, any edition is fine, but the 6th through 7 are preferred if you want to keep up with me or what I'm going to be using, because I have the 6th and 7th editions. I've used other editions. They're just as good. I don't like them any less. In some ways I prefer them, and in some ways I actually feel they're more natural. In some way I feel that they teach you better Latin because some of the exercises and explanations were changed later on. But if you have the 6th or 7th edition, that's not any worse or not any better than the old ones. If you want, you could get the hardcover edition. I recommend it, but it's once again more expensive. as is the color of Lingua Latina. So, use your own judgment there, whether or not you even want to get Wheelock's. But if you like an analytical, logical approach as opposed to a context-based approach, you're definitely going to like Wheelock's. So, and then this last one, Allen and Greenow's New Latin Grammar. Now, this is not so much important for learning, more so for reference. It's not a textbook, it's a reference book. It has everything you'll ever want to know about Latin grammar in there, and it's fully indexed, and it's very organized, and it's a wonderful book, and it's actually something that, and it's chock full of information that's not even related to Latin. Like if you wanted to learn things about Proto-Indo-European or Greek or Etruscan, that's all in there. It has a lot of information that's relevant outside of just Latin. But if you're not really into that kind of thing and you're not really interested in a reference book, then Allen Greenough might not be for you. However, I have 2 copies of it. I have an original copy from, I believe it was either the late 1800s or the early 1900s. It's a very old book. I have an original copy, and I have a newer reprint, and I have a digital copy that I will be making use of in these presentations. So, use that at your discretion. You don't need to buy any of these books necessarily. However, I would recommend all of them in varying degrees. Lingua Latina is definitely the most important. If you want to get the most out of my presentations, you're going to need Lingua Latina. But if you want to go the extra mile and maybe do some independent studying, Wheelock's would be very good. And if you want to really go the extra mile, then Allen and Greenough would absolutely be fantastic. So it's up to you what you want to do, but I recommend getting all of them. But if money is an issue, be prudent. So that's the end of this first presentation, and in the very next part, which I will be making almost immediately, we will study everyone's favorite thing, Latin pronunciation. Fun topic, you'll see. Anyway, folks, thank you for watching. I hope you come see me next time in my next presentation, and I hope you enjoyed.